Greetings. My name is James Moore, and I am the Vice Provost and Chief Diversity Officer at The Ohio State University. On behalf of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion and its fabulous Frank W. Hill Black Culture Center, I would like to welcome you to our 49th annual Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. At the Office of Diversity and Inclusion, we're extremely proud that we're celebrating our 50th anniversary. For half a century, the words and actions of Dr. King served as our moral North Star, pointing the way forward for greater inclusion, equality, and brotherhood. What most know about Dr. King comes from his I Have a Dream speech, where he famously describes his hope for a future America where children are not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. But did you know that Dr. King also spoke about police violence against Black people that day? We can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of the police brutality, King said that day. Joining us tonight is Benjamin Crump, a civil rights attorney who has tried to right the wrongs of some of the unspeakable horrors we've all witnessed in recent years. From Trayvon Martin to Michael Brown to George Floyd to Breonna Taylor, Attorney Crumpton has sought justice in the courts for some of America's most well-known victims of police violence. Recently, the family of Andre Hill, an unarmed Black man killed by the Columbus police, brought Mr. Crump on to handle legal action in the aftermath of that horrific incident. Joining Mr. Crump for this conversation tonight is our very own Dr. Hussain Jeffries, an associate professor of history at The Ohio State University. Professor Jeffries teaches courses on civil rights and Black power and is known well for the power of his poignant, eloquent voice. Thank you again for choosing to spend time with us tonight because I know we have a treat for you. Dr. Jeffries, Attorney Crump, take it away. The floor is now yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Moore. It is always an honor and a pleasure to be able to be in service of the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. It is always an honor and a pleasure to be in service of the Hale Center, especially on such occasions as this, the 49th annual Martin Luther King Jr. celebration. It's a little bit different this year. A lot has been different this academic year for all of us, but that doesn't mean that the occasion is any less significant or important. And it is truly an honor and a pleasure for me to serve as a discussion moderator, conversation facilitator this evening as we welcome virtually to the campus of The Ohio State University, Attorney Benjamin Crump. Dr. Moore just shared a little bit about Attorney Crump, and let me just echo a few of his thoughts and sentiments. Brother Crump has truly been on the front lines of the struggle for justice for the victims of police violence over his career as an attorney, and most certainly in the spotlight, the national spotlight, the international spotlight for the last several years as families of the victims of police violence, of vigilante violence, have turned to Crump in their hour of need. And through Attorney Crump and his firm and his office have been able to find a modicum of justice, unable to bring back the lives of those who have been lost, but has been able to hold many a jurisdiction accountable and to some extent for the actions of the state. Attorney Crump, of course, represented the family of Trayvon Martin. And we'll get to the politics, we'll get to the issues, we'll get to those problems. But I think it's also important that we understand who Attorney Crump is as a person, born and raised in Lumberton, North Carolina, the oldest of 9 siblings. That means, you already knew he was going to be a lawyer because you got to negotiate a household with 9 siblings at some point. A frequent speaker, a frequent author, a graduate of Florida State University, FSU, and the author most recently, and we'll talk a little bit more about biography over the course of the hour, hopefully. But the author most recently of the powerful book, Open Season, Legalized Genocide of People of Color. Open Season, Legalized Genocide of People of Color. When you think about those who are on the front lines of the struggle for justice today in the 21st century in 2021, one of the first people that comes to mind is Attorney Benjamin Crump. Attorney Crump, thank you so much for joining us here at The Ohio State University. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Hey, thank you so much, brother, for having me. I am very honored to be here with you all for this auspicious occasion. And congratulations to Dr. Moore and Dr. Williamson and everyone else on the 50th anniversary of your Martin Luther King observation program. I look forward, Dr. Jeffries, I've read up on you as well, brother, to having a robust conversation about how we move not just the community forward, but also move the culture forward so it can continue to help elevate America to be the best America that it can be.
Absolutely. And I think the point that you just made, this idea that this isn't just about Black folk, when we're dealing with questions of justice, that is universal. That impacts all people, that impacts all communities. And so, of course, Dr. King said, justice too long delayed is justice denied. And you have been fighting to get justice in the moment for as many victims of injustice as possible. I have a series of questions, Attorney Crump, and that have been coming in ever since folk heard that you were going to be with us. But before we turn to that, I just want to, there's so much going on right now. Just within the last few weeks, the end of the Trump administration, this insurrection on the Capitol, all of which connects to questions of democracy and race and injustice. I wonder, and the new administrations saying that we're going to move forward on these questions of police violence and systemic racism. I wonder if you could just share maybe a thought or two on just the moment that we are in right now and how we ought to be thinking about it.
Certainly, Dr. Jeffries, it's ironic that you asked me about the administration right before I came on to be with you all this evening. I was doing an interview with Joy Reid on MSNBC, and we were discussing the racial equity executive order that had been signed today by President Joe Biden. And in signing it, his comments to the public was that he was motivated to do this long before he took office today. He was motivated to do it when he met with my clients, the family of George Floyd and myself in Houston, Texas. And he said something I thought was profound. He said the killing of George Floyd, as many others, but in particular, the killing of George Floyd was like the knee on the neck of justice. And when you think about that, Dr. Jeffries, you think about how long this knee has been on the neck of Black America, as my dear friend and mentor, Reverend Al, said at the memorial for George Floyd, get your knee off our neck, America, because so many times when we think about Breonna Taylor being killed in her own home, when the police busted in on this illegal, unnecessary, an unjustifiable no-knock warrant, because we have to remember that it is all out in the open now that the police officer who was terminated about 5 weeks ago was the sergeant who had to admit they lied on the probable cause affidavit that was used as the basis for the judge to sign the order for the no-knock warrant that led to Breonna Taylor's body being mutilated with 6 bullets. And so when you think about that, but you think about a justice system that would allow none of those officers to be held accountable for killing this Black woman in her own home. We think about Jacob Blake Jr., this brother who literally is running away from the police, trying to get away from the police, as many African Americans do. In fact, the United States Supreme Court said that it is not a crime to run away from the police because it happens so often with marginalized people of color, because when they interact with police, they normally feel like good things don't happen. And so they have a right as an American citizen to not have to confront the police, but they have the legal right to walk away from the police and not be brutalized, as we saw Jacob Blake Jr., who never posed a threat, never confronted, never was making a violent movement towards the police. But everything we see on that video with ocular proof, Dr. Jeffries, is he is moving away from the police. He's trying to get in the car to get his young boys, his children, out of a volatile situation. And we see this police officer grab his t-shirt and shoot him 7 times, point blank range, having deliberate indifference as to whether this young Black man lives or dies. Because when you shoot somebody that close, at that close point blank range, what could you expect to happen that they're not going to be able to live after being shot 7 times? And so he shot and paralyzed Jacob Blake Jr. in front of his little boys, ages 8, 5, and 3. And we can only imagine what psychological problems those babies are going to have for the rest of their life. But when you think about that video image, and then you think about in less than 48 hours in Kenosha, Wisconsin, Kyle Rittenhouse, a young white man, shot 3 people, killing 2 of them, and then walked down the street with an assault weapon hanging from his neck, right past National Guards, right past police officers. Nobody tried to detain him. Nobody shot him in the back. Nobody killed him. He was allowed to walk freely to his home. And when you juxtapose that with Jacob Blake Jr. walking away from the police with no gun, being seen as a threat, this young Black man, but this young white man actually killing people, walking towards the police with a gun, and they don't view him as a threat, it underscores this argument that we continue to make, Dr. Jeffries, that there are 2 justice systems in America, one that governs Black America and another that governs white America, when we should have equal justice for the United States of America. And the very last thing I will say in these opening remarks, because I do want to have a real discussion with you. My grandmother taught me, if you ever get a chance to speak truth to power, baby, you do it. You do it. And I know you all at the Ohio State University, y'all are very powerful. And so I don't want to squander this opportunity to speak truth to power. And so, Dr. Jeffries, the 2 concluding points are simply this. Number 1, for years now, since from Trayvon Martin to Breonna Taylor and George Floyd, I have been going on television, newspaper, interviews, whatever audience I would have, and I would argue that these two justice systems in America exist, one for Black America and one for white America. But now I have prima facie evidence to offer when we consider what happened on January 6, 2021, when we saw all these white citizens, attacking the United States Capitol.
Armed.
Armed, committing crimes. And you juxtapose what they do to young Black people just saying Black Lives Matter. We have a right to exist without being killed, without being brutalized. And yet they are tear gassed, they're pepper sprayed, and they're arrested. But then we see this video of these white citizens committing treason on the US Capitol, and the police officers handle them with kid gloves. Nobody's detained, nobody's arrested, nobody's apprehended. They are allowed to leave after committing crimes. So I say, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then that video is worth billions. And it makes the case without us having to say a word that there are two justice systems that exist in the world, in America. And so my final opening remarks is simply this. Dr. Martin Luther King said it best. He said that we all have a role to play. Each and every one of us have a role to play in this struggle for equality and justice. So I'm so very honored to talk about high ideals with you all at the Ohio State University, because I believe with everything in my heart that the young people will help solve these issues to make it a better world for all of our children, and to make it a more just America, a better America, where George Floyd gets an opportunity to breathe, where Breonna Taylor gets an opportunity to sleep in peace, where Ahmaud Arbery gets an opportunity to run free and not be lynched for jogging while Black, and where your native son, Andre Hill, gets to walk out of his garage holding a cell phone and not be executed, and then not have any sworn law enforcement officer who swore to protect and serve him offer him any medical assistance while he lay dying on the ground for over 15 minutes. And it's all video evidence there. And so I am counting on you, young people of Ohio State, to help join me and Dr. Jeffries on the front line to make America live up to its ideals that we all are created equally. America, that means Black people too. Thank you so much, Dr. Jeffries.
Well, thank you for, you delivered not just opening remarks, you delivered a sermon for us on this King celebration, but that's what it takes, right? I mean, we're not playing here. I mean, these are high stakes. You mentioned in your opening remarks, you mentioned in your comments just a moment ago, the difference in the threat perception. In other words, Black folk are perceived to be threats, whereas white folk in similar situations, even in situations that you mentioned on the Capitol, where they are armed, where they're saying we are coming to stop this, are not perceived as threats at all. Do you have some thoughts on why, not only why that is, but why does it persist? Because that seems to be at the root of so much of the individual in the moment reactions.
Now, that's an excellent question, one I've often contemplated, and one that we talk about in my book, Open Season, The Legalized Genocide of Colored People. And we talk very frankly about it, because I don't think, Dr. Jeffries, it's an accident why the police react the way they do. It is because our legal system speaks volumes not with what they say, but with what they do. Their actions speak so loud to police that they need to hear their words. What do I mean by that? The two quickest ways to get to death row in America is, number one, to be a person of color and to kill a white person. That's the quickest way to get to death row in America. The second quickest way to get to death row in America is to be a person of color and to be accused of killing a white person. I'm on the board for the Innocence Project, and the Innocence Project believes that there are at least 100,000 people sitting in prison who are completely innocent. That number could be as high as 200,000, but they know at least 100,000 people, and a disproportionate number of them are African-American men. And so when you juxtapose that with when a white person kills a black person, that their self-defense argument is 0.500 times more likely to be accepted than when it is reversed. If a black person kills a white person and say, oh, it was self-defense, it was stand your ground, it was whatever you want to say, you will be saying it from a jail cell. But when a white person kills a black person, whether it's Ahmaud Arbery, whether it's Trayvon Martin, and they say self-defense or stand your ground, they are believed. And so the system is in some ways telling you that it is allowed to kill black people, but it is not allowed to kill white people. Because look at the consequences of what happens when you do it. So I believe even police know in that moment where they have to say, is it a threat or not a threat? They say, well, with black people, we can shoot first and ask questions later because we know the law will condone it. But with white people, no, we're not allowed to do that. And so we think about the highest court in the land, the United States Supreme Court, what it says in, Graham v. Connor and Tennessee versus Gardner, the two seminal cases on police excessive use of force in violation of the Fourth Amendment rights against illegal search and seizure. Well, it tells us that all the police have to do when they kill a marginalized person of color is say three little words. I felt threatened. I felt fear. And if they say that, the United States Supreme Court said, it doesn't matter what objective evidence you have. You can't Monday morning quarterback the police. You weren't there. And it's so asinine, y'all, when you think about it. Justice Sonia Sotomayor said in the case a couple of years ago, Mulenex versus Luna in Texas, where, and just hear this for a second, Dr. Jeffries, the state trooper was on the overpass in Texas. The Flynn motorist was under him in a car being chased by other police. He shot from the bridge, killing the motorist, and then said, I was in fear of my life, even though he was a safe distance away. None of the officers who were chasing him said they felt a threat to their life, because the question was asked, well, if he was such a threat, why didn't you all shoot? And the United States Supreme Court granted that state trooper qualified immunity, where Justice Sotomayor said that this is asinine. This policy encourages law enforcement to shoot first and think later. And that policy is not in concert with the constitutional guarantees that we give citizens. But that was the dissent, and she was in the minority. So the law of the land is still that they can shoot first and ask questions later, whether it's Andre Hill, whether it's Alton Sterling, whether it's Laquan McDonald, whether it's Walter Scott, whether it's Stephon Clark in Sacramento, California, whether it's Botham Jones in Dallas, Texas, whether it's Atiana Jefferson in Texas, whether it's Pamela Turner in Houston, Texas. Because it's not just young Black men that they're shooting, they're also shooting young Black women. It's just that the sisters don't get the recognition and attention that brothers often do. That's why I was so happy that we were able to bring attention to the tragedy of our sister Breonna Taylor. And so we still have work to do, Dr. Jeffries.
You know, what you just laid out and the roll call, Attorney Crump, is just too long, and it continues to grow. I mean, one of the things that we know is that over the Washington Post has been keeping track of, because the federal government doesn't, of the numbers of people who have been killed by police. And that number over the last decade has remained steady. It's around 1,000. It hasn't dropped. It hasn't dipped for African Americans, around 350 or so. Wasn't body cameras supposed to take care of this? What happened? I thought we were going to put these bodies, we're going to invest, right? We didn't defund. We're going to increase the funding for police. I thought, so what happened to that? What happened to all the work we've been doing since 2015 that this number has not changed?
Well, I have to chuckle a little bit because you made the argument probably as well as any attorney can make, Dr. Jeffries, when we go in federal courts and we argue these matters, because oftentimes police officers are turning off their body cameras. Exhibit 1, Andre Hill, 3 days before Christmas there in Columbus, Ohio, he gets out on a 311 call, shoots and kills Andre Hill, and then turns the body camera on after he shot him. It's inexplicable why our courts allow these police officers to be able to evade accountability over and over again. But I believe it's a higher, consideration. When you really think about it, it is what I believe, what I have termed to be the intellectual justification of discrimination.
Mm.
That is, poor people of color, no matter what the situation is, always gets the most of injustice and the least of justice.
Mm.
It's appropriate that I remind you all of what Dr. Martin Luther King said in his letter from the Birmingham jail, since this is the MLK program at the Ohio State University. And that is, Dr. King said, just because they say it's legal, that doesn't make it right. He said that everything Hitler did to the Jews in Germany was legal, but that didn't make it right. He said slavery was legal, but that didn't make it right. Segregation was legal, but that didn't make it right. And how they killed Breonna Taylor, they say it's legal, but that doesn't make it right. And we have to remember that over and over again. This was a government with the highest court in the land saying that slavery was legal, that Black people were 3/5 of a human being was legal, saying that the Dred Scott decision, where there were no rights that a Black person had that a white person was bound to respect. They said all of that was legal. So it's a higher thought, Dr. Jeffries, when you say, well, but we see it with our eyes. How can this be? Well, for the history of America, things have been obvious and apparent, but yet they came up with intellectual ways to justify the racism and discrimination. And so we have to make sure our young people are more intelligent to come up with intellectual ways to hold them accountable.
Mm. You have laid out quite eloquently the challenges that we face. That, I mean, the deep roots of injustice, Dred Scott, 1857. I mean, that attitude, as you pointed out, no rights that the white man is bound to respect, that it didn't drop off in 1865 with slavery. I mean, it carried forward into the 20th century and into the 21st century. It's a daunting task, and a lesser person, a lesser attorney might turn away and say, well, there's no way we can do anything about this. But you haven't. I mean, you've stayed right in there, and you've kept fighting. What do you see what that we can be doing? I mean, to turn the justice system. I mean, where should young people, where should students, where should citizens, where should attorneys be putting pressure to try and get some justice in a system that hasn't given us justice literally since we've been here?
You know, that's a very engaging question, because it challenges me to think as well, not just about what has happened in the past, but about things that can occur in the future. And the two things I will say before I give a third point on that very profound question is, number one, we have to remember that whether it's my personal hero, Thurgood Marshall, Constant Baker Motley, Debbie Johnson Roundtree, you know, all these great Black lawyers, they had far more challenges than we had, but yet they found a way to make a system that was never intended for them be a benefit to them. I love when Thurgood Marshall said, you know, the Constitution was never supposed to be for us, but we gonna make it ours anyway, because we are Americans. And I just think that's what we have to do. Number two, the young people have to keep being more intelligent than those who would seek to oppress them. We have to keep being able to espouse ideas like the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, that if we are successful, your Congresswoman, who is the chair of the Congressional Black Caucus, the Honorable Joyce Beatty, will hopefully help us usher that legislation into law that speaks to all these issues of policing in America that brutalizes us and allows them to use excessive force against us, not to mention all the other things we have to deal with, the school to prison pipeline and the prison industrial complex and the inequities in healthcare and environmental racism. All these things we have to fight, because it's not allowed for us to just fight one thing. We got to fight on multiple fronts. But our young people can do it because they're brilliant. And how we know they're brilliant is based on their pedigree, is based on their DNA, which is my concluding point on this question. How I keep getting up, and I never, ever doubt that we won't win this war. My first year of law school, Dr. Jeffries, was one where they was teaching us over and over again. They were trying to indoctrinate in our minds about precedents. Everything has to be based on precedents, because only way we can have consistency in the law is to look at what has happened in the past and make sure that we have similar rulings for now and into the future. And that's what they kept talking about. It got to be based on precedents. Everything you do got to be based on precedents. Now, me trying to be somewhat intellectual as much as I can, I rejected that, Dr. Jeffries, because I knew that the United States Supreme Court has said that slavery was legal in America. And so if I accepted everything they were telling me about precedents, that meant we would still be slaves. You and I both would still be slaves. So I did not accept it, but I understood what they were trying to teach us, that based on precedents, it is a likely indicator of what is to happen in the future. And therefore, when I think of the precedents of Black people in America, I think about the precedents of how we overcame slavery. I think about the precedents of how Black people overcame the Middle Passage. I think about the precedents of how Black people overcame at the founding of this country the 3/5 compromise that said we were 3/5 of a human being. I think about the precedents of how Black people overcame the Dred Scott decision aforementioned about there are no rights that a Black man had that a white man was bound to respect. I think about the precedents of Reconstruction that the Black people overcame and the carpetbaggers. I think about the precedents of Black people overcoming Plessy v. Ferguson that says separate but equal, even though everything you had in your community was going to be inferior to what they had in the white community. I think about the precedents of Black people in America overcoming Jim Crow. I think about the precedents in America of Black people overcoming Jim Crow's much wiser son, Jim Crow Jr., Esquire, PhD. And when I think about all of that, Dr. Jeffries, what it tells me is no matter what they throw at us today, we as Black people have precedents on our side that we gonna overcome it.
Mm-hmm. And in that we find the hope. Right? I mean, when we look at the dim future, and we don't have that much to be optimistic about coming even after the Trump years. When you look back to the model, just as you said, and you called the names of Constant Baker Motley, a Thurgood Marshall, added to his mentor, Charles Hamilton Houston, and just what we were able to endure, that's the hope. The hope is knowing that there are going to be people then, and there are going to be people now who are going to fight for justice, and that's how we all going to get free. That's how we all going to get free.
Yeah, and the precedents, Dr. Jeffries, that no matter what they put, we are here.
Yeah,
we're continuing to excel. Think about what our grandmothers and grandfathers, our great-great-grandmothers and grandfathers in the slave fields, the cotton fields, what they were thinking about this day, where a Dr. Hussain Jeffries could be at the Ohio State University, where Dr. James Moore could be at the Ohio State University, Andre Brown, Lawrence Williamson. You know, they didn't give up because they knew that we were going to overcome. And so they kept sacrificing every day for our children tomorrow. And so we got to sacrifice something for our children tomorrow. So I pray that these young people at Ohio State University understand, as Dr. King said, we all, each and every one of us have a role to play in some fashion or form. I'm not saying everybody got to be at the front line with Black Lives Matter and Reverend Al and me, but you have a role to play. Even if you go into the corporate suites, even if you go into the education, PhD, and all this, you got a role to play in some way of making a better world for all of our children.
You know, we often, those who are familiar with the work that you do, often associate you with serving as the attorney for those who are battling in the courts for justice for victims of police violence. But that's not all that you do. You are, have any number of cases, including, for example, working with the folk up in Flint, Michigan. In other words, could you say a little bit about this sort of the broader work that you do and the other areas in which you find yourself also on the front lines in this fight for justice?
Absolutely, Dr. Jeffries, because we have to remember this is not just a one-pronged battle that we're in. We have to battle on many fronts. And when I think about the environmental racism, it's probably worse than any of these cases, as bad as George Floyd is and Trayvon Martin walking home, getting shot in the heart with a bag of Skittles and a can of iced tea. What happened in Flint is far worse when you think about an entire generation of our children. And more than likely, their children, Dr. Jeffries, will be affected, Kimberly, by them being exposed to poisoned water because they lived in a marginalized, poor community where people just didn't think their life mattered. that it wasn't that important. You know, we could save literally 6 cents for a quart of water, every quart of water. I mean, that's when you get down to what happened in Flint, they were saving about 6 cents.
Mm.
That's it. And they said, we will expose our entire community, a majority minority community who was poor, to be poisoned where their children brain development would be stunted. And it's so bad. If you all saw the 60 Minutes uh, special on Flint, they have built 4 high schools in Flint, all special needs high school, an entire high school for special needs, because the science is telling us that these children will be intellectually challenged, that they will never read or comprehend on a level that a high school graduate will, function on, because they have been poisoned.
Mm.
And unfortunately, Dr. Jeffries, there's a Flint in probably every state in America. We just don't think they matter enough. And thank God we were able to get the state of Michigan, because of the legal actions, to settle for $600 million, which is woefully inadequate. Because I have to say this, because you're speaking truth to power, and I see Ali behind you. We got to speak truth to power when we get a chance. Can you imagine if that was a different community, a more affluent community, in a different zip code, and they poison your children, and that they all were going to be feeble-minded to some degree because of being poisoned and exposed by the lead? How much would America compensate them for?
Yeah.
Just think about that for a second. Or I'm doing a lot of the talcum powder litigation, where, we got documents that prove this corporation, Johnson and Johnson, marketed specifically to minority women, Blacks and Hispanic women, even though their science showed them as late as the 1970s that there was a casual connection between using baby powder and ovarian cancer. And so, we are fighting on all those cases because the Black community oftentimes have been so heartbroken by the legal system that they don't oftentimes trust it, no matter what the situation is. So I put my whole heart on the line and try to convince people we can't give up fighting. And that's why we were able to be successful in Flint, Michigan, and preferably we'll be successful in the talcum powder litigation.
When you think about those cases, um, in comparison to the individual cases of police violence, there you see sort of police depriving a person of color, African American, or really anyone, of their basic sort of civil rights and human rights. But when you look at the broader work that you do in cases like Flint, you realize that when those young people were taken to the streets last summer fighting for under the banner of Black Lives Matter, yeah, they wanted justice for George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, but they also wanted recognition of Black humanity. And that's what is missing. When you do not recognize Black humanity, then you turn the pipes on, you turn the water on, let that run through and poison, just as you said, an entire generation of young folk. I mean, it literally is this question of recognition of Black humanity.
Exactly. I know Gail King, who works with Nationwide there in Columbus. We were having a very deep conversation when we talked about the fact that in the last 4 years, I've gotten more calls from African American executives working in corporate America who are talking about just overt discrimination against them. Maybe it was something in this past administration that emboldened them to be able to disrespect Black humanity like we've never seen before. But when you think about Flint, when you think about all these cases of discrimination that's happening. There's a case that I took on that you all may have heard of called Keon Harrell, where a white woman accused a 14-year-old Black kid of stealing her cell phone. Never saw the kid ever in his life. His father, a Grammy Award winning jazz musician, they're coming down for brunch, and the white woman accuses him. And this is how systematic and institutional racism works and discrimination. The hotel manager immediately sided with this person he perceived to be a white woman and went to this Black kid whose father was there, said, "I'm the hotel manager, just give me the cell phone." As if our children are presumed guilty until proven innocent. You talking about the lack of humanity. I mean, this is a professional manager that's been in the hotel industry for 20 years. But when a white person says something negative or does something negative to the Black people, we have to prove that it is unjustified. And that is the crux of the matter, Dr. Jeffries. We have a rebuttable presumption every day we wake up in our Black skin or our brown skin that we have to prove that we are legitimate for some people to accept us as just being Americans and having a right to exist on this earth, in this country.
When you think about this question of a right to exist, I'm drawn to a question that one of our viewers, or audience question that they asked, and it pertains to here in Ohio. The governor just signed into law a Stand Your Ground bill, as though they didn't learn anything from what Florida did and these other states did. Of course, that was the justification, the rationalization that allowed the murderer of Trayvon Martin to get off. What could you say a little something for those who are less familiar with sort of stand your ground in general? Why is that such a threat and a danger, especially to people of color?
Well, when you think about it on its most elementary level, the reason Trayvon Martin became the #1 news story in the world in 2012 was because, regrettably, Dr. Jeffries, Black people had begrudgingly, in some ways, accepted that the police were going to kill us and not be held accountable. I mean, the statistics bear out it's almost 12 to 1,300 a year of people being killed, and a very disproportionate number of those individuals are Black people, especially Black men. But then with the Stand Your Ground law, they said it's not only the police who can kill our children and get away with murder, it's any Tom, Dick, or Harry, literally, white person who says, stand your ground. I felt threatened. I felt fear. And the law said pretty much that was going to be accepted. It was as if, as Black people, if a white person said, you don't have a right to exist, Dr. Jeffries, as you just said, at this particular moment, at this particular place and time, you don't have a right to exist. So I'm going to kill you, and I'm going to come up with some imaginary fear, some subjective fear, to say that I felt threatened, and the law is going to back me up and say everything I did was legal. Because remember, some of you are young and won't remember this, but some of us, Dr. Williamson, we will remember it, and that is the case of Bernard Getz
in New
York, where the subway rider, the white man, shot 3 young Black men and said it was self-defense, paralyzing one of them. And remember, the court in New York said that race can be a consideration as to whether the fear was real or not, as if saying that a Black person it can't be considered dangerous just because of our skin color. And they said that was the law. And so that's what our battle is about. This stand your ground law is something that says they can criminalize our skin color. And so that's why we have to be smart. And I have to say this really quickly. I remember Professor Dr. William Jones said once, and I thought it was just profound. He said, I bet you, he was in a classroom kind of like this, I bet $500 I can get rid of crime overnight in America. Now, none of us took the bet because we figured if Dr. Jones was saying that, he had something up his sleeve. And so we said, okay, Dr. Jones, we give. How could you get rid of all the crime in America overnight? He said, it's very simple. Just change the definition of crime. Because if I'm a lawmaker and I get to decide what conduct we're going to consider as a crime, then I can predict who the criminals will be. So if I just keep criminalizing the culture of Black and brown people, I can predict who's going to be convicted felons in America. And we see it happen every morning, every afternoon, in every city, every state, and every courtroom in America.
You know, we are up against the clock, the top of the hour, but I want to ask you one final question, sort of a closing comment to get from you. Dr. King, in his last book, entitled that book, Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community? And I want to ask you that question, the question that Dr. King left us with. Where do we go? Where do we go from here?
You know, I think Dr. King did lay out a roadmap for a lot of things that are happening in America today. We have chosen in many occasions to ignore it. You remember at the very end, Dr. King was fighting for economic justice.
Right.
He was saying that, you know, we have to make sure we talk about its life and liberty and pursuit of happiness. It's not enough for us just to say, well, we have a right to live without you killing us, police, unjustly. Or we have a right to be free and you don't take away our liberty from a racist criminal justice system that has the prison industrial complex. But also on that was we have a right to pursuit of happiness. Because when Thomas Jefferson said, we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equally, that they're endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, that to life and liberty and the pursuit of happiness, were America, that included Black people too. And we have to keep reminding them that over and over again. And Dr. King said this. Dr. King said, the coward asked the question, is it safe? He said expediency asked the question, is it politically correct? He said, oh, vanity comes along and asks the question, is it popular? But then Dr. King said, conscience comes along and asks the question, is it right? And Dr. King said, there comes a time when one must take a position that's not popular, nor politically correct, or not even safe. But he said, there comes a time when one must take a position because their conscience tells them it is the right thing to do. I submit to you, Ohio State University, it is the right thing to do to stand up for our children. It is the right thing to do to speak up for our children. And it is the right thing to do to fight for our children. Because if we don't fight for our children's future, we can't expect anybody else to fight for our children's future. So that's where I think we go. We let our conscience guide us, Dr. Jeffries, and we don't be afraid of, you know, not being popular or not being politically correct or, you know, not being safe. We do it because our conscience tells us our children are worth it and somebody did it for us.
Attorney Benjamin Crump, thank you so much for the reminders that you shared with us this evening that we will continue to carry with us going forward. And thank you so much for all the work that you are doing and continuing to do. We are grateful, and we are thankful that you have dedicated and committed your life to fighting for justice for all people. So thank you so much from the community at The Ohio State University for joining us. And thank you everyone who has tuned into this webinar. We encourage you to continue this conversation within your family circles, within your networks of friends. Once you sign off, please do go to ODI's website, www.odi.osu.edu, odi.osu.edu, to review the recording. And also, we ask you to participate in a short survey that will come up, that will populate as soon as we sign off. Again, Attorney Crump, thank you so much for the words that you have shared with us. And everyone, thank you. Be safe and be well.
Thank you, Dr. Jeffries, for your brilliance, brother.